It's a blister pack. Can't even sniff it properly. That's right, my friends, it's a brand new, tasty, sexy episode of Box Fresh. Today we're going to be taking a look at my good friend Eldrad Ulthran. Now, back when I first started playing Warhammer 40k, the first army that I got seriously into collecting was Eldar, and the old metal Eldrad was a miniature that I absolutely loved. But the new plastic one, well, I've not really had much of an interest in Eldar in recent years. So whilst I've coveted the mini and really loved it, I've had no reason to buy my own. But opportunity does knock, and a commission came in for the newer plastic Eldrad, which I think is just a gorgeous miniature. And the customer actually wanted it in the original Ulthran Black and Bone colour scheme. So instantly I thought to myself, Mr. Shy, that's an opportunity to do a banging Box Fresh episode using a miniature that you've always wanted to paint. Let's take a look at how I did that. You can tell me what you think when we're done. Okay, so to begin proceedings, I am sub-assembled with the staff separate and the base separate, and then Eldrad himself just on a little pin, as you can see here. I wanted it sub-assembled like this just because the staff it's a bit fiddly to put it back in once the whole miniature's assembled, but I didn't want it to get in the way of highlighting the cape, and I figured it was probably going to be less of a pain in the ass to have it that way, so that was why I kind of went for that decision. But to be honest, the miniature is paintable fully assembled. You don't need to sub-assemble it in that manner. The only thing I would advise is definitely leaving it off of its base so that you can get underneath it to paint the insides of the cloaks and stuff like that. For the first actual painting process though, we're going to start looking at his sash and his loincloth. Now my order of operations here before I start talking about this is actually quite similar to Duncan's house painting tutorial that he did for Warhammer TV. So if you've seen that tutorial, I will link it in the description. Then that's kind of the way that I'm going to be operating most of these processes. But you know, because this is a Box Fresh, I'll be doing it in my style, not the Warhammer TV style. So that sash and loincloth, let's talk about those. We're going to be starting off with Xereus Purple here and just getting that in as a nice base coat on all of those areas. We'll then go through to shade them with some Drakenhof Nightshade. This is a deep blue shade and I actually think gives a much better, more contrasting shadow to purples. For the highlights on this section, what I'm going to do is actually mix some pink horror into my Xereus Purple and start building up successive highlights of that, getting closer towards sharp edges and the areas that are facing upwards towards the light source, that kind of thing. And we're not going to be going for too much of a really stark kind of neon highlight here. We're just going to be taking this up to a nice kind of mid-pinky purple. Should look pretty sexy. Right, this next one is a much longer process, and that is the inner lining of the outer cape. Now the thing with this is there's a lot of it and we want it in a very bright colour. So because we're undercoated black here, I'm going to start off with Zandri Dust, which gives really good coverage in a couple of coats, usually 2 or 3. That's going to allow me to get the whole thing base coated. But what that's also going to do is give me a good base colour to then start to blend up some highlights. So to do those highlights, I'm just going to start mixing iron rack skin into my Zandri Dust and just keep building it up and building it up again. Now obviously it's worth understanding here that this is the inside of a cloak, so we don't need to build these highlights up mega bright. We don't need to have a ton of contrast here because this whole area is away from the light source. The next thing I want to do is look at that sort of yellow scar thing around his cloak, some bits of trim and stuff like that here and there. So I'm going to start out base coating these in Averland Sunset, which again over the colours that we've currently got down on the miniature goes over really easily. Once I've got that Averland Sunset in and nice and looking smooth, we'll then start to glaze in some Moumang Brown. It takes a bit of a while to build up this glaze, but we want to try and create sort of a bit of modulation over these yellow areas to make them just look a bit like they're playing with the light, maybe like they're a silky fabric or something like that. So the idea here is that we just keep building up these Moumang glazes until we've got some nice kind of shadows starting to look good in there. When we get to highlight in this section, we're just going to start mixing white into that Averland Sunset and just picking out a few highlights here and there. We really don't want to go overboard with these highlights here because yellow can look very washed out very quickly if you highlight it up too far. Obviously, when you highlight in yellow, you're going to be naturally going into really pale tones, and because they're sort of not very saturated and they're very light in value, they do just kind of look a little bit pallid very quickly. So just be careful here not to take these yellow highlights too far. Okay, now I've got a bunch of black to highlight. This miniature does have a ton of black on it if you're painting it like the box art. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go with a nice neutral black workup that's not going to influence everything else that's going on around it too much. I'm going to use Corvus Black first of all over my black undercoat, and that's going to build up my first stage of highlights just very, very gently. Then I'm going to start introducing Dark Reaper into the mix, and Dark Reaper's one of those colours that it will highlight black for you in a really nice neutral non-invasive way. However, it is quite a high coverage paint, so you do have to just be careful about how steadily you build it up into a highlight. Once you've got it starting to look good, then what I wanted to do was just pick out a few little bright spots here and there just to add, you know, a bit of glimmer, a bit of glitz, bit of light play again. You know, with all of these fabrics, you want them to look like they're kind of dancing in the light. So I'm just going to start mixing some white into that Dark Reaper now, just to build up a few highlights there. Then another one of the longer workups here, and we're going to kind of do something similar on the base as well. So whilst I don't show it in the video, I was working on the base at the same time here. But we're going to start with Zandri Dust, and we're going to be picking out all of those bone areas, all those sort of little bits of wraith bone trim on his armour, that kind of rib cagey thing that goes down from his crotch. I don't really know what that's supposed to be called. Guess a crotch bone, but we're going to pick all of those out in Zandri Dust, and then we're going to again start mixing in Iron Rack Skin, and eventually as we get up to the brightest highlights we will start to add some white into that as well, again just being conservative so that we don't make this look too washed out. We've got a bunch of metallics to do next. I'm going to show you the golds here because there's a lot more of them. We're going to start with Retributor armor for the golds, which you'll see me do for most gold workups these days. I'm going to shade it with Reikland Fleshshade, and again, being fairly aggressive on the areas that are more textural, being fairly conservative on the areas that are fairly flat. And then once I've got it all shaded, that shade is dry and looking nice, then I'll start to introduce some highlights by taking Vallejo Metal Color Chrome and mixing more and more and more of it into my Retributor armor to build up brighter and brighter highlights more towards edges and that kind of thing. Again, this is a gold workup that you will have seen me do before, so by now if you've been following my painting style, you'll probably be a bit of an old hand at this, but I just think it's the most reliable gold workup. I really like it. Okay, now we've got a blended power sword to do, and do you know what? If I'd have shown you this entire process on camera, it would take forever. So I've condensed this a lot, but I don't think that's going to make you struggle if you try and replicate this, because you'll see as you apply the paint that it's actually a pretty straightforward self-guiding process. What we're going to do is over that black sword, we're going to first of all take Kantor Blue from Citadel, and we're going to thin that right back to a glaze, and we'll pick one side of the blade to do a glaze at the tip and at the base, and then on the opposite side of the blade, if you imagine it as two facets, we'll glaze towards the center. So we're always going to be glazing outwards towards where we want the brightest part of the glaze to be. So with that considered, what you'll see me doing here is on the left side of the blade, I'm glazing upwards and downwards, and then on the right side of the blade, I'm glazing from the top towards the center and from the bottom towards the center. This builds my intensity of my glaze towards the areas where I need it to be brighter. What I'm then going to do as I start to actually take this up to sort of a bluey grey kind of tone is I'm just going to start adding white into that Kantor Blue. And white obviously is going to start to really up the coverage of the glaze. It's going to make the glaze start to have a lot more purchase and a lot more impact and a lot more brightness very, very quickly. So we do need to keep that paint really, really thin, and I would recommend using either a medium or something like Lamian medium or something like the Painter's Bakery Painter's Milk that I make, and those are just going to help you kind of keep control of that paint while it's super, super thin like that. Now, once you get to the brightest parts of the glaze where you're starting to add white in, you're going to want to reserve a little bit of your paint colour at sort of more of a normal painting thickness, because you're also going to be having to think about putting edge highlights in. We get really, really bright with this glaze towards the extremities of where we want it, but then we also need to kind of accent all of the edges using a highlight colour of a similar brightness. Now, one of the more laborious parts, and look, I've got to be honest, it's freehand, and freehand is a separate skill, okay? Freehand is a skill that you kind of have to develop on its own. My freehand is, I'm very good at some stuff, and I really struggle at other stuff, to be honest. Runes are one of the things I find hard, so this was a labour of love for me, I couldn't afford to make mistakes here because I already had this blended area underneath where a lot of this freehand was going, and so with that in mind I had to just really slow down, really be careful, really take my time, and I probably spent 40 minutes on these runes because I just wanted to be super careful to make sure that they went in good. However, as you can see, once they're done, they do look really nice. Okay, now there's just a bunch of finishing touches to do on the miniature. We've done all of the hard work and we've just got little areas, leather pouches, the eyes. There's a bunch of gems to paint. So let's focus on the gems because everything else, you know, you're pretty much going to be able to figure out for yourself fairly easily. The gems, I sort of get them base coated in kind of the normal traditional way that you are used to seeing them. So, you know, you pick an angle of light reflection and you build up colour towards that reflective area. And as you can see here, you know, they look fairly nice once they're all sort of built up and done. However, for just a little, you know, chef kiss finishing touch on my gems, I like to give them a coat of Ard Coat from GW as well. And that just sort of gives them a natural shimmer. And what this allows you to do is kind of build up a highlight colour to whatever direction you want to, but then you also get a little pinpoint of reflected light from the gloss varnish. So you sort of get that effect of like there being an entry point of light and an exit reflection as well. And that gives the gems just a bit more of a sort of realistic looking glow to them, which I find really beautiful. So once we've got all that done, we need to go to the spinny reveal video. I know you love the spinny reveal video, so let's do that. And there you have it, that is my Eldrad Ulthran, the updated plastic version, based on the box art, but done in my style with my painting techniques and, you know, doing things the way that I like to do them. This was a miniature that I've been dying to get my hands on for a long time, and so it was an absolute pleasure for me to paint. But I do have to be honest with you, it is also at the higher end of difficulty for the things that I've painted recently. Now that's probably largely due to the fact that I paint a lot of Space Marines, and I'll be honest, sometimes I wish I didn't paint so many Space Marines because they do spoil you a bit in terms of how easy they are to do nice looking things on. When you start to get to stuff like Eldar, where you've really got to be super precise and super careful, you do start to notice how much harder they are to paint. So what this has maybe done for me is kind of persuaded me to start trying to paint a bit more of that sort of stuff. Maybe give my Gene Stealer cults a little bit more attention or something like that, and try and find some time to do some of those things. But it was an excellent push, an excellent challenge, and I think it's really important to give yourself those big challenges every now and again. I've actually got the classic metal Eldrad to also do soon for the same client, and so I'm really looking forward to now revisiting that slightly simpler sculpt, but using some of the things that I've learned by painting this harder, more detailed plastic sculpt. Should be a really interesting journey. Anyway, I'm going to start waffling and get out of your ears now, but please, if you liked the video, don't forget to click that thumbs up button and let me know that you liked it. And of course, if you wish to subscribe to the channel, you can enable notifications, and that will keep you up to date on what I'm doing and when I'm posting new content. If you'd like to support the creation of these videos and help me keep the lights on and all of that stuff, then feel free to head over to my Patreon, which is linked in the description. We've got support tiers starting from as little as $1 a month over there, and some really great benefits, including a fantastic community Discord where there are some wonderful hobbyists sharing brilliant work every day. Anyway folks, that's all from me for this one, so I'm going to get out of here, but thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.